Jonathan Rumi, still hanging on the wooden cross, was motionless, his body trembling under the weight of something far greater than acting. Cameras were off. No one moved. No one spoke. On that set, the only sounds were muffled sobs and the heavy, uneven breathing of actors who could barely remain standing. Jonathan Rumi, still hanging on the wooden cross, was motionless, his body trembling under the weight of something far greater than acting. There was no script for what happened next. There was no director's cue. There was no return to business as usual. What unfolded that day was so raw, so overwhelming, that even the crew of The Chosen, seasoned professionals with years of experience, found themselves utterly unprepared. And Dallas Jenkins, the creator and director, had to do something he had never done before. He stopped everything, because what they had just witnessed was not acting anymore. So, what really happened behind the scenes of the Crucifixion in Season 6? Why did the filming of this single sequence leave actors, crew members, and even the director in stunned silence, shaken to the core? And what does it reveal about why this series has touched millions of lives in a way few biblical productions ever could? Stay with me until the end, because this is not just a story about a TV series. It's about something deeper, something that might change the way you see faith, art, and even life itself. Before we dive in, let me ask you something. Have you ever watched a scene in a movie or series that felt so real it pierced through the screen and hit your soul like a tidal wave? What would it take for that to happen? Not because of special effects, not because of music or editing, but because something sacred broke through the lens and touched everyone present. That's exactly what happened here. Since its debut, The Chosen has been more than just another biblical series. It dared to do what few have attempted: strip away the distant, untouchable image of Jesus and reveal him as fully human, laughing, weeping, eating, walking dusty roads with friends. A Jesus who smiles, who gets tired, who feels pain. For millions of viewers, this portrayal has been revolutionary, not because it invents a new story, but because it makes the old story real again. And now, in its 6th season, The Chosen faces its greatest challenge yet: bringing to life the most intense, heart-wrenching 24 hours in human history, the final day of Jesus on earth. Here's why this moment is unlike anything else you've seen. The Crucifixion has been depicted countless times, in paintings, in church art, in epic films like The Passion of the Christ. And yet, even with all those portrayals, Dallas Jenkins knew something was missing. He didn't want just another reenactment. He wanted truth, raw, emotional, unfiltered truth. No shortcuts, no softened edges. That's why in June 2025, the cast and crew left the comfort of their familiar Texas sets and traveled to Matera, Italy, the same ancient city Mel Gibson used for The Passion of the Christ. A place of weathered stone streets and timeless light, where history seems to breathe through every crack in the walls. But no one, not even Jenkins, could have predicted what would happen there. Imagine this: freezing winds cutting through the hills, the sky heavy and gray, actors shivering, not from cold alone, but from something far more profound. Cameras roll, capturing every agonizing second as Jonathan Rumi, portraying Christ, hangs on the cross. Hours pass. His body shakes with exhaustion. The crew fights fatigue, some working through the night. Then, silence. Not because the director called cut, but because something holy descended on that set. People wept openly. Others couldn't move. Elizabeth Tabish, Mary Magdalene, had to leave the set, covering her face, sobbing uncontrollably. Even hardened technicians, men and women who've seen it all, stood frozen, tears streaming silently down their cheeks. Dallas Jenkins later confessed, "In all my years, I've never experienced anything like this. It didn't feel like filming anymore. It felt sacred." This was not just a scene. It was a collision between art and reality, between history and the present moment. And as you'll see in the next few minutes, this extraordinary event tells us something urgent about our world today. A world drowning in distraction, yet starving for meaning. Because when the cross ceases to be a prop and becomes a mirror, that's when everything changes. What makes The Chosen stand apart in a crowded landscape of biblical adaptations? To answer that, we need to rewind for a moment. For decades, film and television have tried to bring the life of Jesus to the screen. From the grand epics of the 1960s to the brutal realism of The Passion of the Christ, each attempt had its own strengths. But most shared a common flaw: distance. Jesus was often presented as a marble statue come to life, majestic, glowing, untouchable, a holy figure so perfect that he felt almost alien. And while that reverence was understandable, it created a barrier. People admired him, but they rarely felt close to him. The Chosen shattered that mold. From the very first episode, Dallas Jenkins and his team made a radical choice. What if Jesus didn't just preach to the crowds, but laughed with his friends? What if he felt hunger after a long day's walk, or needed a moment of silence under the stars? This wasn't creative license. It was truth brought to life. The Gospels themselves reveal a Jesus who wept at a friend's grave, who grew tired and sat by a well, who celebrated at a wedding. The Chosen simply dared to show him as he really was, fully divine, yes, but also fully human, and that changed everything. For viewers across the globe, this human Jesus broke through centuries of stiff portrayals. Suddenly, people who had drifted away from faith or never believed at all felt something stir inside them. They weren't just watching a story, they were meeting a person. Jonathan Rumi's performance was central to this revolution. His Jesus is approachable, tender, even playful at times. He looks his friends in the eye, listens to their fears, and cracks a joke when the tension runs high. That authenticity resonated so deeply that The Chosen became a global phenomenon, translated into dozens of languages, streamed in more than 190 countries, funded entirely by fans who felt this wasn't just a show, it was a mission. But season 6, that's a whole different weight class. From the start, Dallas Jenkins warned fans, this season will break you. Every frame is designed to walk us through the final 24 hours of Jesus' life. Betrayal, agony, abandonment, and ultimately, the cross. Not as a distant, sanitized event, but as a visceral reality that strips away the romanticized veneer. And the crucifixion? That's the heart of it all. It's one thing to read about nails piercing flesh, or to glance at a crucifix in a church. It's another thing entirely to see an actor you've grown to love, who has embodied Jesus for years, gasping for breath on rough-hewn wood, his body racked with exhaustion, his voice breaking with words of forgiveness. This isn't shock value. Jenkins wasn't interested in gore for gore's sake. His goal was to recover something that modern culture often forgets, the cost of love. That's why the choice of location mattered so much. Jenkins could have built a replica set in Texas. It would have been easier, cheaper, and more convenient. But he wanted more than accuracy. He wanted atmosphere. So in June 2025, the entire team packed up and flew to Matera, Italy, a city carved from stone, its streets echoing with centuries of history. If you've seen The Passion of the Christ, you know the haunting beauty of Matera. Every worn cobblestone seems to whisper of ancient sorrow and hope. Filming there wasn't just a production decision, it was an act of reverence, and it paid off in ways no one expected. Because something happened in Matera that defied the boundaries of cinema. What was supposed to be another day of shooting became an unplanned spiritual experience. Actors broke down in tears, not because they were following a script, but because the weight of what they were portraying crushed through the thin layer of performance and pressed straight into their souls. Elizabeth Tabish, Mary Magdalene, later confessed she had to leave the set, her face buried in her hands, sobbing uncontrollably. George Harrison Xanthus, John, described the atmosphere as electric and terrifyingly sacred. Crew members, hard-nosed professionals used to chaos, stood frozen, tears running silently. And Jonathan Rumi, he said it best, I had to empty myself completely. No ego, no acting tricks, just surrender. Because what I was stepping into was holy ground. For 3 weeks, they lived in that tension. Cold nights, long hours, relentless emotional strain. Jenkins asked fans to pray for the team, warning of the mental and spiritual battles raging behind the scenes. And in that crucible of exhaustion and faith, something pure emerged, authenticity. Not manufactured drama, not Hollywood gloss, but raw, unfiltered reality. That's why this season isn't just entertainment. It's a mirror, a question mark carved into every viewer's soul. What does this story mean to you right now in your life? Because here's the truth. In a world drowning in noise, people are starving for what feels real. And when a series dares to pull back the curtain and let truth bleed through the frame, it does more than tell a story. It invites transformation. And this is only the beginning. Behind every unforgettable scene lies a battlefield no audience ever sees. The crucifixion of Jesus has been filmed countless times. From grand 1950s epics to Mel Gibson's harrowing The Passion of the Christ, Hollywood knows this territory, or so it thinks. But what unfolded during The Chosen's Season 6 shoot didn't just push boundaries, it tore them down. Why? Because Dallas Jenkins refused the safety net of convention. Let's start with the logistics. Imagine uprooting an entire production, actors, crew, tons of gear, and relocating to Matera, Italy, a centuries-old city carved from stone. This isn't a studio lot where you can control every variable. It's an unforgiving environment, narrow cobblestone alleys, freezing winds slicing through limestone cliffs, and the constant battle against time and light. 3 weeks of night shoots stretched into the early hours, sometimes past 3 a.m., with temperatures dropping near freezing. The crew layered up in thermal gear. Jonathan Rumi, barefoot, half naked, lashed to a wooden beam in the bitter cold. No stunt doubles, no shortcuts. Even seasoned professionals admitted this was one of the most grueling shoots of their careers. One camera operator later remarked, "It wasn't just cold, it was chaos. Every day felt like a war between perfection and survival." And yet, none of this was the hardest part. The real weight wasn't physical, it was psychological. Actors live in two worlds, the scripted and the real. Usually the line is clear, but during this shoot, that line evaporated. Jonathan Rumi, tasked with portraying Jesus' final agony, entered what he later described as a state of surrender. Not acting, not pretending, something closer to spiritual immersion. For hours, he remained nailed to the cross, not just for the cameras, but to preserve emotional continuity. He fasted for extended periods leading up to the sequence. He prayed before takes. He stripped his soul bare. Dallas Jenkins recalls warning him, "Pace yourself, don't burn out." Jonathan's response, "This isn't about me." That mindset carried a cost. Crew members whispered about the eerie stillness between takes. Jonathan didn't crack jokes. He barely spoke. His eyes, witnesses said, held a depth that made you look away. Here's the hook. This wasn't method acting for glory. It was reverence. Hollywood loves stories of actors pushing themselves. De Niro gaining 60 pounds for Raging Bull. DiCaprio crawling through snow in The Revenant. But what happened in Matera wasn't about Oscars. It was about offering the truest possible depiction of history's most sacred moment. No green screens, no CGI blood splatter, no sterile stage with controlled lighting, just raw elements and raw humanity. Jenkins deliberately avoided shortcuts because he knew if the Crucifixion felt staged, the entire season would collapse under the weight of inauthenticity. So they bled for it, figuratively and almost literally. This is where art crosses into something more. Make no mistake, what Jenkins attempted was risky. Studios hate unpredictability. Weather delays cost money. Emotional overload burns actors out. But he gambled everything on one belief. Truth matters more than convenience. And that gamble paid off. Early screeners sent to a handful of insiders reportedly left viewers shaken and unable to speak. One reviewer wrote, "I thought I'd seen the Crucifixion before. I hadn't. Not like this." What makes this portrayal different isn't the gore level or the camera tricks. It's the invisible weight captured on screen.